Now we've got this bill behind this spider for perspective. We just walked up here and saw this thing in its web. One of the things I love about being in Missouri is the very wide variety of big spiders they have. Hi, we're at one of our training facilities today. Now recently I did a presentation on my top 5 guns for deer hunting, and that led to some people asking me if I had any advice on how to be a more successful deer hunter. So here we are. So today I'm going to give you my top 5 pieces of advice on how to be a more successful deer hunter. Why top 5? Because people seem to love top 5 lists, and because I only know 5 things about deer hunting. So let me tell you number 1, and that is hunt deer where there is deer. Go where the deer are. Now that might seem a little obvious, but I can tell you when I was a kid I went deer hunting, and I probably hunted 7 seasons before I got my first deer. And that was partially because I didn't know anything about deer hunting, and that's partially because there were very few deer in the area. Now we can debate and discuss which are the best guns and which are the best methods and what's the best fishing pole and fish bait and fish hooks and so on. But what is not debatable is if you go fishing in a pond that does not have any fish in it, you won't catch a fish. You gotta hunt where there are deer. So how do you determine whether or not there's deer in an area? There's many ways. Let me cover just a few of them. First, just go out there and walk around the area, and I mean 2, 3, 4 weeks before the season. See if you find any deer tracks, deer droppings, deer trails, and make sure that those things you're finding are fresh. When you see a deer track in hard, dry dirt, but that track was made when it was mud, and it hasn't rained in 2 weeks, you know that that deer hasn't been there in 2 weeks. You gotta find stuff that's fresh. Another thing that can really help is something called a trail cam. Lots of different types of them. They're not as expensive as you think, and they can be equipped with night vision and motion sensors, so you can put them on deer trails, and that will not only tell you whether or not there's deer in the area, but you'll know exactly where that deer was and when that deer was there. They can be very helpful. Also, just a low-tech way of doing it is, again, 2, 3, 4 weeks before the season, if it's an area you can drive in, just go out there at midnight, leave your guns at home, you don't want to be accused of poaching, and drive around the area at midnight and see what you see in the headlights. You got to determine, is this an area that has a good population of deer in it? Now, let me show you tip number 2. Number 2 on my list is, once you've figured out where you're going to go hunting, then evaluate that environment and the tools and talents you have available to you and select the right hunting method. Now there's many different hunting methods, and no, I do not consider road hunting a legitimate hunting method, but I'm going to cover 3 main methods. The first one of which is still hunting. Now I know I use the word still, but still hunting does not mean sitting still, it means walking through the countryside looking for a deer. Sometimes it's called deer stalking. Well, I don't like to use that term because I don't want to be known as a deer stalker. Makes it sound like I'm sending him texts and emails and harassing him. But the thing with still hunting is that it can be effective under some conditions, but most of the time it isn't. In an environment like this, especially in a few weeks when deer season starts, most of this vegetation is going to be dead and dry, and walking on it is like walking on cornflakes, and you will make a lot of noise. There's been a few occasions where I've been just sitting somewhere in the woods or sitting on a stand, and a still hunter just happened to walk by. There's been occasions where I've seen deer go by, not one that was legal to shoot, and the deer, I look at it and think, that deer looks spooked. Look at my watch. The hunter walked by 5 minutes later, and I've seen that on multiple occasions. Quite often you're making enough noise, you are pushing those deer way out in front of you. Now, the times where still hunting can work is especially when it's windy or even more so rainy. You get up in the morning, and if it's a windy, rainy day, not a monsoon, but a light rain, that will get the deer up and moving, and that wind and rain will cover your scent and your sound. And if you're on a good trail, still hunting can be very effective. I've gotten up in the morning, walked on a good trail, walk a mile out and a mile back on a sunny day, didn't see anything. Get up the next morning, it's windy and rainy, walk that exact same trail, see 20 deer, shoot one of them. Still hunting under the right conditions can be effective, but most of us just do not have the stealth to do it effectively. And as my friend Lester said, there is nothing louder than someone who's trying to be quiet. Now next on my list is hunting from a stand. Now let me show you a deer stand. A really good method for hunting, depending on where you are and what you have available to you, is a stand or a blind. Now sometimes just have a stand in a tree, and sometimes you buy them at the store, but a lot of people just build them out of whatever materials they have. This one's made out of particle board and corrugated aluminum, and it's got this nice window that opens, and it has a rudimentary camouflage paint job. But what really makes it camouflaged is the fact that it's been here for years, and so to the deer it's just part of the background. Also, you see this environment, you've got a lot of leafy trees. Remember, in a few weeks when deer season starts, all those leaves will be dead and on the ground. So they'll be very loud to walk on, making the blind an even better idea. But even though this area will be a little more open once all the leaves are on the ground, still about the farthest shot we'll take from here will be approximately 60 meters. Now this blind has a really high-tech blue tarp as a roof. Also, this gun port overlooks this open area that looks like a road, but it isn't. And there's another gun port on the other side looking into these trees over here. So you might have anywhere from a 30-meter to 150-meter shot. You may also see that over my left shoulder is a cabin back there. Well, it's got a wood-burning stove, and that's where everybody goes for lunch after a morning of sitting in this blind. Now, this may look very low-tech, and it is. This doesn't even have any attempt to camouflage it. But it doesn't need that because it's been here for years, and again, to the deer, it's just part of the backdrop. And I can tell you that my crew shoots deer out of this blind every year. And for those who want to cast dispersion on our blue tarp deer blind, these are just some of the deer we've shot from that blind. And I don't mean dating back to the Nixon administration, I mean just the last few years. Now up here is a wide open area, and that can easily be overwatched from some kind of stand or blind. But when we get into this area behind me, this is a defilade with a lot of thick foliage in it. And in areas like this is a really good place to do what we call a deer drive. And that's where you have people in various locations at one end of it, and then other people walking toward them, hopefully pushing the deer out. Now as you pan across this area, you'll see that this foliage doesn't look all that thick. And as you can see, this brush gets really thick really fast. There could be a platoon of deer hiding in here and you'd never see them. A drive can be a very effective way to hunt deer, but there's some downsides to it as well. One of those being, from what I understand, it's illegal to do deer driving in some jurisdictions. There's also the matter of you can't do it by yourself. Sometimes you need 3, 4, 5, even a dozen people. Also, a big requirement is that those people have to know the area and be able to work together and have to stay on task. Let me tell you an anecdote. A while ago, I had a path that I could walk along that I thought I could walk along quietly. Didn't work out. I walked in there and I saw just a glimpse of a deer as it disappeared here and just a glimpse as it disappeared there. And I thought, okay, I need someone staged on the other end. So I coordinated with the guy I was hunting with and put him on top of a hill. And then I walked through that area. I see a couple of deer, just a glimpse of their tail as they run out what should have been right in front of him. Great. Until 1 minute later, I see him walking toward me over here. Well, it was a 5-minute walk from there to where he was. He hadn't been there when the deer walked by because he couldn't stay on task. And nothing ruins a deer drive like people who can't figure out what they're supposed to do and stay on that task. Another downside to the deer drive is you've got people walking toward other people that are waiting for something to shoot at. Safety becomes an incredibly important issue. Now, once you've selected the area you're going to hunt and the method you're going to use to hunt, then you have to have the right firearm for that task. Now, this is a Winchester 30-06, and it's got a Leopold non-adjustable 4-power scope on it. And it's belonged to one of my crew for a long time, and I don't think I've ever fired it, but it was just handed to me along with the assurance that it's sighted in. Well, is it sighted in? Is it sighted in for me? Is it sighted in at the 150 meters at which we might have to shoot? And is it sighted in for the ammunition I brought? Now, the ammunition I have is Remington green and yellow box 30-06 150 grain pointed soft point bullet. And I'll go back 150 meters and I'll shoot at this target on your right, and we'll see if it's zeroed for me and the task at hand. Well, it looks like our rifle's zeroed pretty well. Now, that is not a very good group, and I could make excuses about I've never fired this rifle before and there were a lot of mosquitoes buzzing around my head. But bottom line is, that's not a very good group. But it does tell us that at 150, this rifle is on. But we know that I might also take a much closer shot. So let me go back to 30 meters and I'll shoot the target on your left and see how we do. Now, when shooting at about 30 meters, this time I was shooting offhand. But still, this is not a particularly good group, but it tells us two things. One, for the distances that I intend to fire, this rifle with the ammunition that I'm using are zeroed just fine. And two, if I'm going to use this rifle for opening day, I need to practice with it a little more. Now, I'm in front of Walmart where they sell these pre-made blinds, so if you have to hunt on public land or you don't have the means to put up your own blind, and they can range from hundreds of dollars all the way down to this little one here for less than 30. However, if you're going to hunt from something this small, you probably need a rifle a little shorter than that Model 70 I had earlier. Now, we've covered selecting the right place to go hunting, the right method, getting the right firearm, and training with it. Number 4 on my list is preparing to go hunting. Now, I could go on for hours just about this, but I want to condense it to just a few minutes. When I'm talking about preparing, I mean a few things. First and foremost is prepare for the hunt, as in make sure you have your license and deer tag on you. I've actually seen, as we're getting ready to leave the house, somebody scrambling to make sure he has his tag because he can't remember where he put it. Also preparing for the hunt in things like make sure you have game bags with you, make sure you have your gutting and skinning gear with you on your person and that you've sharpened it. And I don't mean at midnight the night before, I mean days or weeks ahead of time. Also things like, I don't care what time of day it is or where you're going, carry a flashlight with fresh batteries and make sure you got those fresh batteries a couple of days or weeks ahead of time. Let me tell you an anecdote. We're going on our annual rabbit hunt. We meet at somebody's house, we get all the gear in the truck, we're leaving town, when Joe, believe it or not, announces that he needs to stop at 7-Eleven because he needs batteries for his camera. He's known for an entire year that this trip was coming, but didn't think about batteries until we're on our way out of town. Don't be that guy. Prepare for the hunt days or weeks out. Now, that also means carrying with you survival equipment commensurate with the situation you're in, your needs, and your abilities. Now, you see, I've got my LBV on, and I use this just out of habit. But whether you have an LBV or a fanny pack or a backpack, you've got to have the stuff you need, but not so much stuff that your pack becomes heavy and is burdensome and you leave it in the truck. Now, I've got extra ammunition, I've got a compass, I've got my pistol, I have 2 canteens. In this pack back here, I've got cold weather gear, I have a poncho, I have snacks, I have all kinds of stuff like that. I have medical equipment, I've got a pressure dressing right here. And the list goes on. And you have to carry whatever's necessary for you. Now, another thing in preparing for the hunt, you see I always carry these small binos. I really don't like scopes on hunting rifles. A scope can be very useful for a lot of things. I'm just not a big fan of them. But the thing with a scope is when you're just looking at the area, seeing what's going on, remember every time you use your scope as a telescope, you're aiming at something. With the binos, I can look through these and say, yeah, that's a cow, without having to point my rifle at it. Now, another thing about getting prepared to go hunting is preparing yourself. Doing your stretches, doing your workouts, and doing these things weeks out, not the night before. You don't want to pick opening morning while you're trying to put a deer in the back of the pickup to determine how much you can deadlift. You should be working out beforehand. Yes, I know, a lot easier said than done. Also, things like you're probably going to wear a good pair of outdoor boots. You got to get those on your feet and work out those boots and your feet doing some walks days or weeks ahead of time. You don't want a giant blister on your foot opening day. And again, I could go on for hours. I just wanted to hit a very short version of you have to prepare for going hunting. Okay, we're back at the house and it's time for point 5 on my top 5 list, and that is be very skeptical of people who claim to be experts in deer hunting. I realize that might sound counter to everything I've said so far, but remember at the beginning I did say I was going to make this a top 5 list in part because I only know 5 things about deer hunting. I could bore you for hours with anecdotes of all the crazy things people have told me over the years about deer hunting, but I'm going to narrow it down to just two. One is, I went hunting, I'm still hunting, walking through the forest, came across a place where people were using corn to bait deer. Well, I ended up coming out on this logging road, meet up with a guy who offers to give me a ride back around to my truck. Well, that was nice. And on this ride, I'm telling him about what I'd found, and he tells me, deer don't eat corn. Every farmer I've ever talked to that grew corn has told me about how the deer decimate his crop. You buy dried corn to put in your deer feeder. I can't even imagine how this guy came up with the notion that deer don't eat corn. Now, another time, I was talking to somebody who really is a very skilled deer hunter, and I was telling him about how the next day I was going to go down this path by a stream that I had discovered, because I thought the deer were bedded down in that area, and he tells me that deer don't bed down by streams, as if he'd read that right out of the deer rule book. Well, I went down the path, sure enough, found a deer bedded down by the stream. I guess that deer hadn't read the rule book. Now, in this case, he's not mistaken. He is purposely giving me disinformation. That's just the kind of guy he is, and that's why none of us hunt with him anymore. And that's the thing about people who claim to be experts, is you're going to get a lot of false information from them, either unintentionally or intentionally. So what you've got to do is figure things out for yourself, try some different stuff and see what works, and go hunting with somebody that's hopefully trustworthy. Now, this is the part in the video where I normally say, don't try this at home, I'm what you call a professional. Well, I know you're all going to try this at home. And so what I will say is, after deer season this fall, send me a picture of the deer you get.